the majority of Americans support trans kids and don't want to fight these culture wars and don't support book bans and do want climate action. I was just looking at new polling this morning. The majority of Americans support the transition to clean energy. They want it in their towns. So again and again, we see this tiny minority trying to exert their will on a massive populace that does not want it. And so to my mind, it is just a matter of this massive populace rising up and saying, no, just no, we won't do it. And we're going to fight you so many different ways that you can try to stop us, but you cannot possibly succeed because we will come at you from every direction possible. And that's what we're doing.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Wilson, and you're listening to What the Gerrymander, brought to you by Hoosier Victory Alliance, an organization I co-founded. This podcast is our attempt to raise the alarm about the war MAGA Republicans are waging against Americans in Indiana and across the country. MAGA is implementing a strategy of voter suppression, gerrymandering, and cruel legislation to take away our freedom and increase their power. They're using fascist tactics, corruption, conspiracy theories, and disinformation to make themselves and their billionaire funders richer and more powerful. They target the most vulnerable among us, but make no mistake, we and our children are targets too, whatever our gender, color, sexual orientation, or location. Across the country, the fascist MAGA party is forcing transgender kids and adults to detransition, greatly increasing their risk of suicide. MAGA is pushing gun ownership for white Christians as part of their war and pretending to believe that more guns makes America safer. We know this is a vile lie, and our children are paying the price with their lives. And MAGA has systematically stripped bodily autonomy for women, first in red states and potentially nationwide. MAGA is banning books, and if they can't ban books, they're shuttering public libraries, defunding public education, and outlawing the teaching of the real history of America. All of this is connected, and it's a war against you and me and all Americans who want to live in a pluralistic democracy. Please help us in this fight for our collective lives by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you can, please give a recurring donation of $10 or whatever you can afford to help us build progressive power in Indiana and across Red America. And please know that we are here because we believe that each one of us, no matter our gender, our race, our religion, or our background, belongs in this country. We all deserve the freedom to thrive, live authentically, be free from fear and hunger, and we will do everything we can to educate, elect, and empower people who will help us win this fight. Today, I spoke to Jessica Craven, the author of the daily Substack, Chop Wood, Carry Water. She's a community organizer, activist, mom, and elected member of the Los Angeles County Democratic Party. She's a member of the California Democratic Environmental Caucus, a climate activist, and a grassroots volunteer who has knocked doors, phone banked, fundraised, texted, and postcarded for hundreds, maybe thousands of progressive candidates. Jessica has made it her mission to get regular people more involved with politics on both a federal and local level and conducts Activism 101 workshops to groups all over the country. She also does this on TikTok, where she's a political content creator. We talked a lot about TikTok today and talked about how young people are getting their information from TikTok and how they're so thirsty for information that they can use. I think you'll enjoy this conversation with Jess, who's one of the most dedicated activists I've ever met. She inspires me every day to stay in this fight, even when I get tired. If you've been listening a while, you know I think this is a war of inches. If we can organize and reach a few more voters in each district, if we can reach out to a couple more friends who feel disenfranchised and convince them to vote, if we give small recurring donations so we can fund candidates for every state legislative seat, that's how we build power. Jess is the living embodiment of this, helping us save our freedom, one call, one postcard, one phone bag, one TikTok at a time. Hello, Jess, and welcome to the What the Gerrymander podcast.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to have you. I first learned about your newsletter, Chop Wood, Carry Water, in 2021, I think. But I know that you've been doing it a lot longer. Can you tell us more about it? I don't know if our listeners know about what you do and what it is and what your goal is with it?
Sure. So I started Chopwood Carry Water right after Donald Trump was elected, pretty much the week after he was elected. The whole thing started very unintentionally. First of all, of course, like most people, I did not foresee Trump winning. And I was in the same state of, absolute shock and devastation that, many, many, many Americans were. So I quickly realized that if I didn't find a way to sort of do something, I was going to lose my mind. And I was going to fall into a sort of depression and anxiety spiral that I did not want to deal with, quite frankly. So I had a saying in the back of my head that I had learned from my dad when I was going through a personal crisis in my 30s. Chop wood, carry water. He would say that to me on really bad days when I didn't know how I was going to get through the day. He would say, just, chop wood, carry water. You just want to get to bedtime tonight. And then tomorrow you'll wake up and you'll do that again. And one day you will have gotten through this. And so when Trump was elected and one of my girlfriends called me crying and said, what are we going to do? I said, I guess we're going to chop wood, carry water. I guess we're just going to figure out how to get through this a day at a time. And that became the basis of my newsletter, which started out just being to a couple of friends and family members and eventually started going out to more and more people with just a few things that people could do every day. Basically, the things I was doing. I said, here's the phone calls that I'm making. I became familiar with Indivisible. And so I started to understand the importance of, lobbying our lawmakers to try to stop some of the worst offenses of the Trump administration. And that eventually became the newsletter that it is today, which ironically, I've published it 5 days a week ever since November of 2016. I mean, with a few breaks for vacations and things like that, but mostly I publish. And it has built a readership slowly and steadily through the Trump years. And I sort of thought, well, maybe when Trump, is voted out, maybe I'll stop. I don't know. And then, of course, it has quadrupled many times over since Trump left office. I think as we have realized that our democracy is really under an attack that is much larger than Donald Trump. So actually the readership has grown sort of exponentially in the last couple of years. So it's a thing. And I try to give people a couple of calls to make to their representatives and something they can do to help win an election, because it's really important that we are constantly trying to elect more good lawmakers. Otherwise we can make all the phone calls we want. But if we have a lawmaker like, say, Ted Cruz, who doesn't even have his voicemail turned on half of the time, it doesn't really matter, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, so my basic motto is hope is an action. So I'm not always going to feel hope, but when I act, I generate more hope, both for myself and for the people around me, and I can actually make change that way. So that's the idea behind the newsletter.
Wow. Well, that actually is kind of my philosophy as well. People ask me, how can you be so involved, especially in a red state when things are looking so bad? And my answer is that's the only way I can get through this is if I'm actively trying to stop it. I can't just sit and watch things happen. I would go into a spiral of despair that I don't think I could pull myself out of. So thank you for providing guidance to people who kind of throw up their hands and say, well, what can I do about this? Because I think it can feel so large for people to know where to focus their energy is a really important thing. Right. And one of the things that we're doing in some of the MAGA captured red states is, have you heard about Blue Ohio? Blue Missouri.
Yes.
Right. So we're hoping to stand up Blue Indiana. And the point is to contest every seat.
Yes.
And the goal for people who are in very red areas is not necessarily to win the election, but it is to garner as many votes as possible, to ask as many people who probably have not been asked for their vote in a long time. And then that will help uptick it. So that is one of the ways that people can, in states where it seems completely hopeless, get on board, is to help stand up candidates in places where they may not be competitive, but it's really important to start the organization on the ground. So we talk a lot on this podcast about MAGA and the war that the movement is waging on Americans. We had Ryan Bussey, who was the former gun executive who talked about how the NRA has been waging this war for decades.
Yeah.
And we know that MAGA is not just waging policy battles on different things. It's all a concerted effort, right? To attack our bodily freedom, our freedom to educate our kids, freedom to get the kids the medical treatment they need, to protect them from gun violence. So what do you say to people who might read your newsletter, but still are feeling really helpless against this assault, especially if they've got a trans kid or might become pregnant, when it's not necessarily even abortion that's the issue. It's just OBGYN care, because many of these states are losing OBGYNs like crazy. What do you say to people who are really just feeling like there's no way to stop this?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, I am the mom to a trans child. So I have a non-binary 13-year-old. And they are, my teacher in a lot of ways. I'm incredibly grateful to be the mom of a trans child at this moment, because I want to fight for all kids out there anyway as a mom, but particularly having this child who has taught me so much about, the gender binary. And I've learned so much from them. It's really personal for me. And so I guess all I can say to that is I understand the feeling of hopelessness. I don't live in a red state, so that feeling, I haven't experienced it personally, but I know that at every moment in human history, there have been challenges that felt insurmountable from really evil forces, right? That has existed as long as humans have existed. There have always been oppressive forces and exploitative forces. And it's not that we always win against them, but that we often do when we band together. And at this moment in history, I would say we are better poised to win against these forces than many groups who have come before us. We've got social media, we have TikTok, we have an incredibly informed and historically aware electorate. We have seen what happened in, 1935 Germany, and we don't want to repeat that, although it does feel that some Americans do. We are able to sort of coordinate our actions in a way that no group really ever has before in the history of mankind. Like, this is all new. So yes, it does feel hopeless and it can feel overwhelming. I choose, however, to see this as an enormous opportunity for major transformation. And I think at some point, to take a cynical standpoint and just go, well, we're screwed. I give up and I'm not going to fight this because this, and I hear this attitude sometimes. I'll see comments on TikTok like, oh, we've got no chance. That kind of cynicism to me is a very destructive force. No great thing in human history has been achieved by a cynic. That's not how it works. It is visionaries, it is dreamers, or it is simply people who say, I'm not going to quit. Like, quitting is not an option. Sitting back and doing nothing is not an option. I don't know if we can win, but I am sure as hell not going to win if I sit on the sidelines. And I am sure as hell not going to cede the ground to these monsters. So for me, I don't know. I can't see the future. I feel quite certain that this group of Americans who oppose what is happening right now, which we have to remember is the majority of Americans by a wide shot, right? Banding together, we can beat this. And it's really important to constantly remember that even in a state like, wherever, Tennessee, these lawmakers they represent a tiny sliver of the popular opinion, and they have been given an enormous platform because of cheating. And so when we remember that, at least we feel less despair. Because I think what can really knock us out at the knees is a feeling of like, oh, the majority of Americans feel this way. This is so horrible, but they don't. They don't.
Right.
The majority of Americans support trans kids and don't want to fight these culture wars and don't support book bans and do want climate action. I was just looking at new polling this morning. The majority of Americans support the transition to clean energy. They want it in their towns. So again and again, we see this tiny minority trying to exert their will on a massive populace that does not want it. And so to my mind, it is just a matter of this massive populace rising up and saying, no, just no. We won't do it. And we're going to fight you so many different ways that you can try to stop us, but you cannot possibly succeed because we will come at you from every direction possible. And that's what we're doing. And it requires patience and it requires steadfastness, which is something I've talked about in my newsletter before. We're not going to win tomorrow. We're not going to win in a year. Americans are so used to the quick fix. We're going to get this tomorrow and then we move on to the next thing. No, democracy is I hate to use the expression, it's a marathon, not a sprint, because that's so overused, but it is a long, long fight.
It is. It is. And I keep talking about how we're going to win by inches, right? And especially in states that MAGA has captured, I think a lot of people are conditioned to not feel like they have any say in the matter because the other side has cheated, right? They've created districts where they're going to win because they've drawn the lines that way and they suppress the vote. They don't make it easy to vote. And so a lot of people sort of, they retreat into a shell. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to reach out to those people and let them know that they're not alone and that it's not possible to be not political
right
anymore, because if it ever was, because politics is coming for you, whether you like it or not. And I think one of my first guests, Josh Lowry, who ran for state senate in Indiana, made a very good point when he said, Republicans are really good at scaring their people to say, well, these people are going to come for you and for your kid and your child is going to be harmed and your kid. And whereas we as Democrats sometimes make it seem like everyone needs to stand up for somebody else. And I think that it's really important for people to know that it really isn't about everybody else. I have a 14-year-old and he's cis, but he has at least 10 friends who are non-binary or trans. And letting people know that trans kids are all of our kids,
yep.
And even if you don't know if you have a trans kid, you might, because you don't know whether they're coming out to you or not. So we have to, I think, take responsibility as if every one of these things were us and our kids. And we have to find a way to talk about it in a way that lets people know that we're all in it together. And that's not to paper over the very real differences and the intersectional issues, but I think just letting people come to understand that it's not somebody else's problem, right?
Yeah.
That we're all, even the blue state people like you and me, we feel like we might be able to compartmentalize it. But the reality is, if we let up even a little bit and MAGA gets into more power nationally, or there's a judge somewhere, or the fascist onslaught is not limited to states that we call red.
Not at all. I mean, they want to pass national trans sports bans and national abortion bans, and they're coming for all of that. They want, permitless carry nationally. I mean, they will come for all of that eventually. Yes.
One of the things I think it's important to do, and tell me what you think about this, is you talked a lot about social media, particularly TikTok. I feel like there are moments that we can capitalize on. In Tennessee, when those 3 legislators stood up and walked to the well and picked up that megaphone, that was a moment that rose to national attention because they didn't sit silently. They didn't sit decorously. They didn't fall for the civility argument. They went up and took the megaphone. And I think we need to do more of that. And I think Zoe Zephyr is another really good example of that. She has been amazing, but I'm not sure that enough of the country knows about her. And so one of the things that I try to do is raise up some awareness of those people and those moments that we can use to educate a more national audience, where somebody will then start looking into the Speaker of the Montana House and figuring out where, like in Tennessee, the Speaker doesn't actually live in his district, or some such.
I actually asked Judd Legume. I don't know if you're familiar with his wonderful newsletter, Popular Information. He broke the story about, the Tennessee Holler broke the story about Cameron Sexton, but then Judd Legume amplified it. And I asked him if he would take a look at Matt Reher, I think his name is, the Montana House Speaker. But here's an ironic little aside about Montana. You may know that the governor of Montana, his son is non-binary. So his son is actually lobbying him extremely hard to veto that bill. And this is the thing, is that more and more these Republican lawmakers are not going to be able to escape the fact that some of their kids, lots of their kids will come out as LGBTQ, and then they'll have to really decide. It's going to change things as it becomes more sort of broadly culturally accepted, whether they like it or not, and whether they legislate against it or not. These kids are coming out. This generation is not going to stop being who they are. And amazingly, as much as they keep trying to ban books and even ban TikTok, it's like, well, unless you're going to ban the internet and take the phones away from these kids that you handed them, good luck. They'll just find another place to get their information. You cannot stop them. So yeah, I have a lot of faith, and I don't mean to put all the burden on the young generation. I think that's wrong to do, but they are on fire, this generation. They're going to do great things, and they have access to tools that none of us had.
No, I am so impressed with my guy is, on the younger end of this generation, but the ones who are in high school and college, I am unbelievably impressed with their drive and their sense of responsibility. And frankly, every revolution in the history of the world has been driven by young people.
Yeah.
I'm a Gen X kid, and we were a small generation. But this generation, I think, is empowered in a way that we never were. Maybe the millennials were. And part of that, I think, is because their parents are Gen X. But I'm so impressed with their drive. I'm so impressed with their authenticity. 20% of Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ. 3% of Gen X does. Do we really think that anybody, like humanity, has changed in that time period?
Right.
Of course not.
Right.
So how do we keep Gen Z motivated and keep them from giving up? I mean, it's not our responsibility to keep them motivated, but how do we help them and be allies in empowering them?
Well, that's a great question. And that's why I'm on TikTok, because honestly, my newsletter, most of my subscribers are like, they're sort of our generation more. I don't know that the youngest generation does newsletters. And if they do, I'm not sure they would do my newsletter just because I'm a 55-year-old. But I found, by pure accident, going over to TikTok, which I did just to recruit phone bankers before the Biden election, before the 2020 election, that there is a massive hunger for information and for help in engaging. And so what we can do, because every Zoom phone bank I go to, every Activism 101 I've taught, 95% of the people in the room were, over, say, 45, right? So because maybe we are more settled in our lives, we have more time to put, we've seen more things, but we have an opportunity to be teachers and facilitators to this young, incredibly smart, connected generation. They want to do things. They know how they feel. They know what they believe, but no one's ever taught them, for example, how to call their congress member, or how exactly a bill gets passed, or what state elections are important for, what the different lawmakers are doing, why it matters to care about a mayoral race in Nebraska. So those are the kinds of things I talk about on TikTok. And I feel humbled because I have apparently been able to be useful. I feel useful there. And that's, again, was an accident, but we can show by example. So a lot of young people do feel hopeful. And when I say to them, you can take that feeling of despair you're feeling, turn it into anger and channel it into action. You will feel better and you will make change. Like, know your power. Know your power. And that is what we can do. And a lot of them already do, and they don't need to be told by me or anybody. But some of them don't. But when you say things to them like, hey, you guys, guess what? Only 27% of people your age from 18 to 25 voted in the 22 midterms. Look at how well we did in those elections with only 27% of you voting. Why don't you register your friends? Once young people are registered, they turn out at like 75%. They're really good about voting once they're registered. So why don't you just register your friends? Do you see how much unrealized power you have? 27% of you, and we kicked ass in that election. Imagine if we get you up to 35%, 40, 50, you'll destroy the other side. And so that is a great deal of my message on TikTok is just like, please know how powerful you are. And I would say that, frankly, to any voter anywhere. We don't vote enough to know what our power is. And so once we all start turning out in numbers, in full force, we actually can defeat the enemy. It's just a truism that, remember do you know how many people didn't vote in the 2020 elections, the most important elections of our lifetime? 80 million people. 80 million people who still think their vote doesn't matter or were disenfranchised
but
or
also,
whatever.
Right. Exactly.
Yes,
I think
lots
that we
of them.
can't forget that there's a lot of voter suppression and
lots of
you're
it
suppressed.
Right. Lots of it.
You kind of check out. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure you've canvassed or phone banked. And how many people do you talk to who are just like, I don't vote. Elections don't affect me. But I think people are really starting to realize that that's not true. And part of our job is to keep showing people, like you talked about, you think politics don't affect you? Next time you try to go to a hospital in northern Idaho, you're going to find there's no hospital for you, even if you just broke your leg because of the abortion bills that your Republican legislators passed.
Right. And in Indiana, the med schools aren't even training OBGYNs there anymore. They're doing all their training of OBGYNs in Illinois. But that's part of healthcare. And you can't train people properly if they can't do the range of healthcare.
Yeah. And the people are not going to want to come to you. There's an enormous brain drain. I mean, honestly, these states, I don't even think understand how bad it will be. College students not wanting to come to their state, young people not wanting to stay in their state, doctors not wanting to come. You need to make your state a welcoming place for young people. My husband was saying, he was like, wasn't North Dakota, which just passed this terrible abortion bill, he was like, weren't they the ones a couple of years ago that were offering to pay people $10,000 to move to their state? And yeah, but good luck now. You're going to have to offer people $10 million to try to get them to come to your state now. And I don't think they'd come even then.
No, but in those states, there are people sounding that alarm because it starts with the defunding of public education, right? To indoctrinate people in Christian nationalism. So they take the money out of the schools to put them in the vouchers. But then you don't graduate as many people who don't go to college or a trade, and you have a major drain. When my kid's ready to go to college, I'm seriously thinking about where it's safe for him to go. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Where is it safe? Where are there fewer guns? Where should you make a stupid mistake? Will you not get penalized for it? Where is it racially more inclusive? Where is it more inclusive for LGBTQ? I mean, one of the problems, I think, and we see a little bit of it this week with all the news about Tucker Carlson getting fired from Fox, is in that bubble. They really think that the blue states are scenes of carnage, and they have no idea how much the blue states really subsidize red states. And I'm not sure, especially with the fragmentation of social media, how we fix that. Maybe it's TikTok.
It might be. It might be. I mean, honestly, that most young people, that's where they get their news. None of them have cable. You do a TikTok about cutting the cord. They're like, who has cable? They don't have cable. Cable news, like Fox News, is like the Republican Party. It has a demographics problem. It can't survive the dying off of its current viewership, as is true with the Republicans. And neither of them are doing anything to court the next generations. So they've built in their own destruction, and they are doing it more. They're doubling down on it all the time. So it's a baffling business model, and it's a baffling political model for me.
It makes sense if you don't believe in democracy, however. So if you aren't counting on winning by the ballot box, you're counting on winning by force in some way, then it makes sense.
Right.
Because then you are accruing more power to a smaller group of people.
Yeah.
Which is what they're trying to do. I ran communications for my co-host, who's not here today. Heidi Beidinger ran for State House in Indiana. I ran her communication shop. And so we had a TikTok and she was on. I was just putting up her videos. And in the last 3 days, I've started putting videos up. But it has taken me so long to be willing to just put my face in front of that camera. So any tips for those of us in the older generations on how to, really get out there and TikTok our butts off?
Well, here's the thing. Again, this is really surprising that I'm on TikTok at all, let alone that I have a following. I think that what people are drawn to on TikTok, I mean, I understand that there are like videos of, people dancing and like Botoxed people but anyone who has seen me knows that that is not me. I wear no makeup. I'm not a believer in plastic surgery. I don't make a huge amount of effort with my visuals. I think people are genuinely drawn to authenticity on the platform. And I think they're drawn to good information. I recommend authenticity and having some good information. Talk about whatever you're passionate about. People pick up on passion. They pick up on someone who's got something to say and an opinion and information. So I find the most compelling TikToks are people who are just like really passionate about what they're talking about. My favorite political follow on TikTok is a woman, and she makes no effort with presentation at all. Sometimes she's just sitting on her bed, the laundry's in the background, like no effort, but she's so smart. She knows so much about political science. I love her TikToks, and she's got a lot of followers. People are not super concerned about production value on TikTok, unless you're someone looking to have, I mean, if you're a politics girl, that's a different thing. But there are a lot of sort of, maybe you would call us micro influencers, I don't know, who are just putting out good informative content and not worrying overly about how it looks. And people appreciate that, especially teaching. There is such a need for people just teaching civics, talking honestly about the way government works. Jess Piper in Missouri is a great example.
She was on 2 times ago.
She's great. I love her. And again, she's very similar to me. She's like, she's not trying to look good. She's just like, here's what's happening today in Missouri. Like, and it's great. People love her. Understandably, like there is so much inauthenticity in this world right now. For me, the gift I can give to young people is just to be an authentic person, just someone that they can listen to and trust, and not wonder if I'm like trying to sell them something or trying to get my own cable TV show. I just want to be a voice that they can trust and learn something from. And so that's what I do over there. And it seems to be working. So if anyone wanted to try that, they could do that too. Maybe.
Wow. Well, I think that is so inspiring, because I think a lot of us worry about channel our anxiety into the things that aren't so important on TikTok. And if we just got over ourselves and got there to talk to people like normal, I think we'd be better off.
I have a lot of opinions about all the ways in which especially women are sort of forced into I won't do it. I just won't. I'm not interested anymore. I might have been 30 years ago, but now I have a very strong sense of who I am. I'm very comfortable with myself. I don't care, what people think about the way I look. We're trying to save our country. Like, the last thing in the world I care about is, my skin tone. Have I put on like lipstick? No. Like, we are fighting fascism. So it's really, frills are unimportant to me. And I actually think that most of the young people on TikTok feel the same. They understand the stakes. They're scared, and we all should be. And so they just want someone who will talk to them directly and compassionately and helpfully. And so that's a thing that we can all try to do.
That is. And I have I have those conversations all the time with my kid. And now I'll just widen the audience. See if
that's a really good idea. Yes, I think that's a great idea. I often will do TikToks and just imagine I'm talking to my 13-year-old, and because a lot of people want things explained the same way. I've actually done a TikTok where I said, I'm going to try to talk about Moore v. Harper the way I just explained it to my 13-year-old. And it got 200,000 views. People really were like, oh, thank you so much. Because, people want to have things explained to them. We hear about the Republicans just passed this bill, this spending bill, but nobody really just sits and just says, here, let me just explain what's in it. And then you do that.
Well, plus talking about process stuff like that is useless anyway. I mean, people want to know how it affects them.
Right.
More than anything else.
And if you can find a way to do that, people will listen. So.
Well, you have just taught me something, and I hope our listeners get out there and get the hell off of Twitter. And I can't speak because I'm still there, although I really don't want to be. But let's go where the people are, because they're not on Twitter anymore. And
I'm not on Twitter either. I got off that platform when Elon Musk bought it. So yeah, people can find whatever platform they're on. Some people have a huge Facebook following. Some people are really like, I don't know that the platform matters as much as using the platform you have to spread the word. If you're a PTA president, or maybe that's not a great example because you can't really do politics in PTA, speaking as a former PTA president, ironically. But, if you're in a carpool group, talk to your carpool parents, like wherever we are, big or small. It is imperative right now that every American not feel like a victim of what's happening, but feel like an empowered agent of victory over it. Because every single person is the minute they decide that they are.
And there we have it.
And there you have it. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Jess. I think that is the way we need to close it, because what a way to close it. So
Good.
Thank you for coming on and for helping to educate as many people as we can with this.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for what you're doing. What a terrific podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation. And, I look forward to coming back someday soon.
Thanks for listening to What the Gerrymander. We're working toward building Blue Indiana and ask that you make a small recurring donation at HoosierVictoryAlliance.org. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. We thank you, and democracy thanks you.